Tax our petrol, tax our shirt, tax our footwear, tax our dirt, tax our mobile, tax our calls, tax our hovels, crumbling walls. Individual taxpayers, mainly the salaried middle class, were already contributing more than the corporations last year, and yet no action was taken. That just 2% of Indians, the hard-working taxpayers, ma'am, have been really carrying this country on their backs. India has multiple and confusing GST rates. Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, a few years ago, I was constrained to observe of my absent friend, the Honourable Finance Minister, that her budget speech in this House reminded me of the garage mechanic who said, "I couldn't fix your brakes, so I made the horn louder." Looking at this year's finance bill in her absence, I think she has slightly changed her tune. She's now saying to taxpayers, "I couldn't repair the roof, so I brought you an umbrella." This finance bill is a classic case of patchwork solutions at a time when the nation needs clarity, conviction and decisive leadership. The government's economic management finds itself in the grasp of deep-rooted structural challenges, Madam Chairman. We've seen growth targets being scaled down. Double-digit growth is apparently unattainable, and the ambitions of maintaining a respectable growth rate of even 6% and above are fading away. The portion of our population engaged in agriculture is higher than ever, while manufacturing has shrunk to around 15% of GDP, the lowest in this century, ma'am. Our informal sectors of employment are soaring, and dependence on foreign capital inflows to manage the current account deficit is growing amidst a staggering situation where our exports are stagnating, production is not going up. Even those who are earning 5 or 6 times the per capita income are now struggling to maintain their standard of living. So Viksit Bharat by 2047 is a laudable objective for a quarter century from now. But how does this finance bill begin to get us there? It has taken the government years to finally realize that just 2% of Indians, the hard-working taxpayers, ma'am, have been really carrying this country on their backs. Individual taxpayers, mainly the salaried middle class, were already contributing more than the corporations last year, and yet no action was taken. That would have been the time to act, as I pointed out in last year's budget debate. But now, in the current financial year, corporate taxes have crawled up by 8%, while individual and non-corporate taxation has soared by 21%. Now the government finally wakes up and gives something of a tax break to the salaried middle class. Who else is financing the government? The Aam Aadmi, through indirect taxes, most notoriously GST. Instead of the good and simple tax we all wanted, India has multiple and confusing GST rates, including the highest GST rate in the world at 28%. But tax revenue still lags at 18% of GDP. In contrast, China has 13% GST cap, but they collect 20% of GDP with it. Vietnam has an even lower 8% cap and collects 19% of GDP. Thailand, GST is only 7%, ma'am, and they get net 17% of GDP. Now, beyond exorbitant rates, our system carries a dubious tax, the dubious burden of being the most complex tax in the world. 77 countries have GST, and they impose only 1 or 2 tax slabs. This multi-rate structure in our country has only further raised the compliance burden for businesses. Indeed, bifurcating input tax claims based on different product tax rates is a significant hurdle for businesses. There's supposed to be an advanced ruling mechanism that should help. And where does all this money, all this tax, direct and indirect, end up? Mostly lost, apparently, because 28.59 lakh crores, both disputed and undisputed, in unrealized tax revenue has been sitting untouched in this finance bill, nearly double the amount from fiscal year 21. Imagine if this was actually realized, our entire fiscal deficit for fiscal year 25 could be vanishing overnight. But no, instead, 13.97 lakh crores in corporate tax remains unrealized. Only 9.11 lakhs has been collected. Similarly, non-corporate tax demand stands at 14.62 lakh crore. Collections lag at 10.45. And GST evasion has doubled to 2 lakh crores already this year, with 18,000 fake entities caught. Many more remain undetected. Now, while all this is going on, between 2017 and 2022, 35,000 wealthy Indians The so-called high net worth individuals left our country to relocate abroad, complaining of tax terrorism. Obviously, when rich people migrate, their wealth also migrates with them. And this affects revenue generation, wealth creation, employment opportunities. Surely we need to review not just their effective tax rates, but the manner in which tax demands are made that drive such people away. Unleashing tax terrorism is self-destructive, madam. It reduces sources of long-term revenue from future wealth creation. The government's attempt to raise money through other means, all failure. Through disinvestment, underwhelming results. They've abandoned the strategy. Reports suggest that the PLI scheme, introduced with such fanfare, will also be allowed to lapse because it hasn't worked. Such is the state of affairs that the government now relies on the Reserve Bank of India's dividend as a major source of revenue. That's neither sustainable nor ideal. And this bill prompts another question, Madam Chairman. If the government is set to forego almost 1 lakh crores in direct tax revenue and 2,600 crore in indirect taxes, on top of the inevitable drop in import tariffs due to likely reductions in customs revenue prompted by our responses to the American government policies, and on top of that declining capital gains tax amid a stock market downturn, then revenue receipts are going to be further squeezed across all these categories. How can the government claim it will cut the fiscal deficit to 4.4% for the coming financial year? The maths don't add up. Is our Finance Minister, welcome Madam Finance Minister, are you offering us Jadugar economics? How can we reduce the fiscal deficit in these circumstances? And if we do, who pays the price? And let me ask, ma'am, very frankly, why is it that only 2% Indians are paying income tax? The reasons are endless. Unemployment, income inequality, poverty, inflation. But can the government continue to run itself on the backs of just 2% of our people? While the economy is crawling forward at a snail's pace, income distribution is as lopsided as ever. The top 1%, their share more than doubled, from 10% in 1991 to 23% in 2023. And then the top 10%, so the top 1% went to 23%, the top 10% went from 35% to 59%. And the bottom 50% of our population, their share of our national income has shrunk from 20% to 13%. Clearly, prosperity and growth aren't slow for everyone, just for those of the bottom half of our population. But they are the ones who need progress the most. Madam Chairman, it's becoming almost painfully repetitive. Every time we talk about unemployment, we're faced with the same grim statistics. Reports predict we need to generate 10 million jobs annually from 2024 to 2030 to keep up with the growth targets. Yet the skill mismatch is glaring. Only half the graduates of our country possess the skills required by industry, leaving a significant gap in their employability. And skill development, sadly, has been a failure. Just look at their placement figures. Economic growth and prosperity, Madam Chairman, seem to be slipping further away as unemployment rises, poverty deepens, jobs are scarce, wages are stagnant, and just when struggling households think they might catch a break, instead of easing the burden, small businesses find themselves drowning in compliance rules. Informal workers are still making up a chunk of the workforce, and they're pushed further to the margins. So since the Finance Minister has been kind enough to join us, let me capture the present situation in some light verse. Tax our petrol, tax our shirt, tax our footwear, tax our dirt. Tax our mobile, tax our calls, tax our hovels, crumbling walls. Tax our salary, tax our ride, tax our mithai on the side. Tax our sorrow, tax our cheer, tax our future year by year. GST income tax forms pile high, cesses, surcharges make us sigh. Roads with potholes, trains that derail. Where does it go? Is it all a fail? When we ask, is this all in vain? You smile and say, it's for the nation's gain. And if we ask you to try and fix it, you point and say, you will be Vixit. Yet still we pay with a patriotic heart, hoping our cash will play a small part in building a future bright and fair for the nation we love beyond compare.